I'm Mike Brilla, host of the Inspired Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Berwick Augustin. He is a former teacher, school administrator, and is currently an education consultant, a business owner, and the author of our focus today, which is his book, The Education Formula, Maximizing the Village. Such a cool talk. You're going to learn so much. This is so awesome. And by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews and left a review. Could you do that for me? Say some nice words and maybe 5 stars? That'd be so cool. You could also go to my the little link on my webpage and buy me a cup of coffee, which really is $1 or $2. Help me support the podcast with updating equipment and so forth. That'd be so nice if you did that. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sharing, and enjoy the show.
And talking about perspective, like your perspective on just being a parent doesn't change until that baby comes out and is crying and you realize I am responsible for this little human for the rest of his or her life.
Yes.
Right. Your entire world will change. And so because our world is the way that it is because of little people who grew up to be adults. And so whatever it is that you embed in these little humans, is going to have an impact on society as a whole, whether good or bad.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Berwick Augustin is the founder of Evoke 180, a leading publishing company that also specializes in Haitian-Creole translations. He is an educational consultant and keynote speaker who embodies 2 decades of experience as a writer, teacher, and assistant principal. Berwick is the author most recently of The Education Formula, also Days, Months, and Seasons in Haitian Creole, in addition to the Haitian-Creole Alphabet, and the series 1803, which has the Haitian Flag, and 1803, Black Freedom. So cool. Got so much stuff going on there, Berwick. Thank you so much for joining me today, and say hi to everyone.
What's going on, everyone? And thank you for having me, Stephen. I'm excited to be here.
Well, glad to have you, and this is cool. You got a lot of stuff happening, and we're going to start by talking about some of that stuff. So you have Evoke 180. Tell us what its purpose is. Tell us a little bit about it.
So Evoke 180 stems from just the work that I do. And I feel like I believe that the work that I do is transformative. And so Evoke, which means to stir up, and 180, I chose 180 because of change, right? Because when you want to make a change, you make a 180 turn, and you literally have to turn your back and go the opposite way. So to stir up change. And so in a creative way, I just chose Evoke 180 as the name of the company, so that everything that we do, that's ultimately the end goal.
Very cool. So, good choice of words. Picture is painted nice and pretty right there. You can
appreciate it.
You get it. So so now I understand that you're a publisher. So you're publishing through this. This name as well. So you want to talk a little bit about, are you looking for authors, or do you have a series of authors, or is it about, something that's coming down the road? How does that work?
Well, the way that works is that I do have a publishing company, and I self-publish my books, and I have published quite a few authors under the company. And it's something that kind of, it came out organically because I started doing it myself, and after a while, a couple of people were like, "Hey, I would like to write a book as well, and so can you help me out?" And it went from giving advice to actually just taking the individuals on as clients, and so that really evolved. I would say during the pandemic was when I took on a first client where it became more than just giving advice. And so, and thankfully I've been able to build a team to be able to do the work because again, publishing a book is not an overnight thing, and it's definitely not a one-man band. so it's actually been extremely interesting, and I haven't really promoted it as much as I should. But again, every time I do work, and when you do good work, people are going to speak to others, and
Right.
and word of mouth is still the best form of advertising. So that's really how that has evolved.
I gotcha. Very cool. So nice, and it's cool to have a nice, it's a growing part of what you do, and to be able to publish other people's works as well as your own. So good stuff. Kudos on that. So something else when I've spent time on your website that it's right there on the main page, and I wanted to talk about it is you have the Berwick Augustin Academy. And it's right there on the front page of your website, and it's cool. You cannot ignore this. And this is noted on your website. It says your journey to essay writing success starts now. So can you share a little bit about what this academy is focused on accomplishing, and talk about this essay writing?
So my experience in education has been from elementary to high school, right? And I spent at least 3.5 years specifically teaching essay writing as a standalone course. And in doing that, I realized that a lot of the things that students need and all of the other courses are embedded in essay writing, because you have to do research, you have to use critical thinking, you have to use analytical skills in order to be able to really effectively do an essay. It also requires reading comprehension, where you have to read, annotate, and use the information correctly. And I had a few parents who approached me to tutor their kids, and I was like, okay. Once a second parent approached me, I was like, you know what? I can't clone myself. So let me just put this as a self-paced course online. And so that really kind of and that's how that evolved. And the essay writing it has opinion, informative, and also argumentative.
Very cool. So yeah, still working on that cloning thing though. But that's awesome, because that's it's in working with the essay. I mean, just like you said, being able to learn how to put together thoughts, arguments, make a point. All the incredible talent right there.
And it's also with the language skills, right? Because if kids ultimately want to go to college, they have to write an essay to get into college, right? And so writing itself and being able to communicate not only verbally but also through writing is something even in the workforce, right? Or you have to write an email and things of that nature. It's extremely important for you, but it's extremely important for you to be able to communicate as well. So it's a lifelong skill.
I love that. Most definitely. It's when you can communicate through written form, it says a lot about you as a person, and so getting better at it is only going to help.
Absolutely.
Love that. All right, so we're going to start delving into your book, The Education Formula: Maximizing the Village. All right, this is cool. What inspired you to write The Education Formula?
So the inspiration behind the book was just the different experiences I've had, right? I've been able to see education on so many different levels, right? I obviously, being a student, right? And then after college, being an educator, and went from an educator in a classroom to being a reading coach, and then from being a reading coach to being an assistant principal, right? And now as a parent, right, myself, I've been able to see and be on different aspects of education, right? So I have multiple lenses and experiences where I've seen what works and what doesn't work, right? And what is needed. And so I call it the education formula because it's I've heard just about, I think, every conversation that you could think of, from frustrated parents to administrators to the teachers, and the underlying elements or or the underlying things that are needed for each of the stakeholders, right? So I just took all of the experiences and other people's experiences as well, and put them in a book where I'm like, you know what, is digestible and it's actionable, where people can read it and be able to say, okay, I have my takeaways that I can implement right now in order to be able to do better and whatever space I may be in.
That's so important. I just wanted to say that because, you know, it's interesting when you talked about gathering those different experiences that you've had. Because like I remember a long time ago when I was a history teacher in high school, there was electricity and there's, but so I was in a high school where I taught 10th grade world history on a team. And when we met, we brought up some principles like from the middle school. So when we met, so when a parent wanted to meet with you, they met with the whole team as well as a counselor. So they could talk about anything and everything they needed to. And we had this one meeting the one day, and the parent, and so it's funny, by the way, thinking about what you just said a minute ago about the things you learn when you have your own children, because that's where I'm going with this. Because I don't think I would have liked having to meet with the whole group either. But that's how we did it. And I was in my mid to late 20s and had no children yet. And the parent was very upset at the math teacher on our team. And now, don't get me wrong, she could do her fair share of earning people's anger, all right? But I thought for sure that she was kind of innocent in this one and that they just were misunderstanding. So I opened my big mouth and I said something. All right? I don't remember exactly what I said, but whatever I said, and I get along well with people and such, so it wasn't going to be antagonistic, whatever I said, but whatever I said made the mom look at me and say, "You do not understand." By the way, and if those of you, as you're listening, it was said as I'm saying it right now, which is the pointing of a finger, all right? The shaking of a finger at me. And she said, "You do not understand. You do not have children." And those are her exact words. I will never forget them because it came back later, not to haunt me, but it stayed with me. And it made me think of things a little differently, to try and think of them as a parent. And then later when I did have my own children, there are some things that I became to understand about your children, you know.
Nah, it's true. Experience is the best teacher.
It is, isn't it? It's like suddenly, and it makes you see things like you're talking about. It makes you, there's another side to this, and another side to this, and another side to this. Right. You know, one of the things I got to ask you, I mean, when we talk about that, I mean, what do you come away like? So you're an assistant principal. Is there something you pulled away from that is part of your thinking about the different experiences? I mean, that specifically has to do with being an assistant principal that kind of plays in this, what you've written.
Yeah, I mean, just from an administrative standpoint, right? I think like a lot of times as educators in the classroom, we if we don't, a lot of educators don't have good relationships with their administrators. And I think a lot of it is because there isn't a lot of openness, right? Because administrators have their own pain points and different things that they have to do. And so their mind is always on, I need to get this done and I don't have time to explain it, just do it, right? Because they have pressures, coming from the district or whomever. and I think like, and being in that world and being able to see, right, what it looks like and how to be able to communicate or effectively work with your teachers so that they don't have to necessarily know all the nuts and bolts of being an administrator. But if we're transparent enough and we understand what the vision and the mission is and just the approaches, right, or the systems and the procedures that are in place and the culture that you build, then it makes it a bit easier on both ends because it's a lot that they deal with as well. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that I shed light on that because sometimes it's not a lot of compassion towards the administrators. It's just like a team.
Right.
The team loses, man, get rid of the coach.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
It's like the coach is not playing the game, but get rid of him because the game plan wasn't good, or he didn't do what he didn't do. So let's get another coach in. It's not the players.
Right. That's a good point, because a lot of people, it's suddenly you can have, if you're not careful, you can have both sides angry at you. As the administrator, it's like, wait a second, what's this? And so no, and it does bring a whole nother aspect to it, because sometimes one of the things you see as an administrator is when a rule or a procedure is standing in the way of really trying to help or solve or get the two sides talking to each other. So I think this is so powerful. All right. So, in chapter 1 of the education formula, you start with this, and I love this: raising little humans in a battlefield like no other. All right. So I've taken it out of context. I need you to put it back into context and tell me what you're talking about.
So raising little humans is a battlefield like no other, right? And it is because it is. And talking about perspective, like your perspective on just being a parent doesn't change until that baby comes out and is crying and you realize I am responsible for this little human for the rest of his or her life.
Yes.
Right. Your entire world will change. And so because our world is the way that it is because of little people who grew up to be adults. And so whatever it is that you embed in these little humans, is going to have an impact on society as a whole, whether good or bad, right? It's almost as if like I used an analogy one time. I wrote a poem and I was like, as parents, you're a painter, you're an artist, right? And you can either paint a mess or a masterpiece, right? And it's all on you because, and the thing is, as you're doing that, it's whatever comes out eventually when this baby grows up is going to be all of the things that you put into it. And so and it's a battlefield because especially as we've seen morally, our world has just been deteriorating. And so you have to be very intentional, and you have to be and you have to understand that you have to approach raising children as if you're going into war, because that's what it feels like, right? With the onslaught of things that are constantly coming on, right? Between social media, between schools, between just everything around you, that you have to stay the course. Because if you don't teach your children, then it's a whole world of other individuals or things who are ready to do it for you.
I think that's so important, because that is something that, a lot of people don't realize. I mean, because it's just something as simple as one day in, let's say second grade, another child comes up to your child and says, hey, I heard this new word today. Why don't you go ask the teacher what this word means? And, the
right.
word is not good. Yeah. That's not that I've had that experience, but I have. All right. And it's like, they're all ready to start raising your kid for you. And you don't even have a choice sometimes when something like that happens. And all of a sudden a new world is introduced to your kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially that of being in trouble.
Yeah.
Why would you ask me that question? Never mind. Anyway, the point is that there's so many people, issues, things, and today all the social media and all the electronic stuff that could easily be, taking you in a different direction. And I think it's funny. So when I was a kid, they were worried about Saturday morning cartoons. I think they were there's a little more out there today. So. Yeah.
Now they got to worry about that little box that's in their hand that they carry every day. They got access to the world to. Right.
You got that right.
The phones it's like a minefield, right?
Very much so. Very, very appropriate analogy there, because it is, and if they're carrying it, if you're as the parent allowing them to carry it all the time, I mean, because that fits right there too. Because it's like some forego that argument about, when is a good age to start introducing them to it. 'Cause some of them it's like, fine, you're whining about something here. Look at this as you're in the car, and they start playing with the phone.
Yeah, and my kids who are 7, 8, and 10 are constantly asking, when are we going to get a phone? I'm like, when you're ready for it and you're responsible for it. They're like, oh, and when is that? I'll let you know. But right now you're not.
Nice.
and that's the thing. I think just having those honest conversations, and also, to your point, a phone should not be a pacifier, right? Because if you're talking to your child or something is going on and you need your child to behave, and not having the discipline to say, I need you to stop doing that, and for your child to have the respect of you being the authority to actually do it, where you feel like you got to pacify it, right? Because then they're going to transfer that into the classroom. Now, when the authority in the classroom have a conversation and tell them to follow directions, they're going to feel entitled, like, no, because they're used to being pacified. So unless you either you're going to give me something to make me stop, I'm not going to stop. And so now you have behavior issues, and a parent may have 1 or 2 children doing this. Now imagine a teacher with 20, 30, 40 kids who are raised that way and having to deal with that on a regular basis, right? So it's not a good look.
It's not. And that whole thing, like you were talking about, I mean, you decide as that parent whether it's going to be a mess or a masterpiece, and whether you know it or not. And you do something like you were just talking about, where you're appeasing them or giving in to this demand. And so when they get in that teacher's classroom, so if they go in there with the, I'll be quiet, what are you going to give me?
Right.
It's like, oh, geez.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's trouble coming in all different ways, especially.
All different.
Yeah. Especially if the teacher ends up being one who appeases the behavior too, or the other end of the spectrum, which is not in a million years. And, it's going to be rough.
It's constant conflict.
Very much so. Very much so. All right. So this is a statement out of later in this chapter. Lastly, be open to learning. Parenting is a continual learning process. And so this goes right with what we were just talking about. I mean, you note this toward the conclusion of chapter 1. So let's talk about this, that ongoing needing to learn as a parent.
Yeah. And so I really, and I was very intentional to start the book with parents, and the first 3 chapters specifically to parents, because this whole education thing starts with them, right? As we were just talking about, whatever it is that they learn at home, they transfer those skills or lack thereof into the classroom. And the fact that as parents, parenting does not come with a manual, right? So we make a lot of mistakes. Our parents made mistakes.
Right. Oh yeah.
Right. And so, and I think it's extremely important for us to be able to, as parents, understand that it's a continual process for us to learn, especially adapting to what's going on in our culture. Not that your values should change, but the way that you approach and navigate certain things to be open. Like, for example, I was raised, I came from Haiti. So when I came to Miami, I was raised in a culture where in Haiti, like growing up, if an adult was speaking to you, you could not look at them in the eye, because that was considered a form of disrespect. And so when I came to the United States, I'm in class and the teacher's talking, and so I have my head down. So the teacher and I is getting vexed because he feels like I'm being disrespectful, right? And so now a whole commotion happens, and I kept doing this, so on and so forth. So now my dad comes in, and so he's upset at me because he got to come to the school, and so so the teacher's livid, like, no, he's disrespectful, so on and so forth. At this point, I barely speak English. I'm just as confused as everybody else.
Right.
And so once we finally got to the bottom of what was going on, it was like, and I explained, and so my dad was like, no, I teach him to not look at adults when he's speaking, because that's from my country, my culture, that's what we do. And so the whole office was like, whoa. And so now I'm sitting there, and nobody, there was no apology to me.
Right.
It was like this light bulb moment comes on, and they're like, oh, okay, it's understood, but yet I'm still sitting there just like,
nice.
And that's an example example of how, with parenting, things are going to happen, and kids are going to be exposed to different things, and just navigating conversations, right? Because if we live with our parents for 18, 20, 25 years, right? And so we found ourselves doing some of the same things that they did.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And some of those things might not have been effective. Right. And so now when we have our own children, we try to do the same thing with them. And we have to understand that, some of the things that we learned, some of the things that we do need to be undone. You know what I'm saying? So that's one of the things with the process that I'm talking about is just understanding that it's your continual learning, and you don't stop learning until you're 6 feet under.
Nice thought too, by the way. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's. I used to travel on Sunday nights because I would, in part of my career, I changed communities. It's a whole nother story to tell you another time. But the point is that I would be living in another community from Sunday night through Thursday night, and so I would drive in. I would leave at my home in one town, and I would drive down to this other town, and on Sunday night. And a lot of times I'd go in and I'd get things like my groceries for the week and stuff like that. And so I'd go into the Walmart that was in that town, and I'd go shopping at like 11:30 at night on a Sunday night. I was amazed at how many parents were there with their children, their little children, not teenagers. They're little kids at 11:30 at night on a Sunday night. And you talk about things that they learn. I mean, because first of all, they're kind of wired. They're like, some you see they're kind of falling asleep in the buggy, and others you see they're kind of woohoo. All right, they're bouncing around the aisles and all kinds of stuff. And that in itself is something where you see somebody who, and I understand there's things that cause us that we need to have somebody watch the kids. We got to figure out something so you can go do the shopping. I mean, that town had a lot of shift type of jobs, but they're hauling the children with them wherever they go, and so I cannot imagine what that child the next day in school,
right,
is sitting there sleeping in the in the class.
Yeah.
But
I spoke about that a little bit in the book as well. Like just those basic things, and rest is definitely a huge one, a huge component.
It is, and it's something that if they don't get them to do it, and it's like because that's where you got to step in as the parent, and I think some of them miss that role. Instead, they placate them, give them the video game, give them the phone, give them the whatever it is they're going to placate them with. So interesting. Yeah. I love that section though, because you get into a whole lot, and you cannot if you're in education long enough, you go through all the paths because somewhere in there, if you're not a parent in the beginning, so you're a teacher, and then suddenly you do become a parent, and then might become an administrator. So I love what you're talking about here. So let's move on. At the beginning of chapter 2, you note, because education starts at home, guardians are the front line of the defense for children. So once again, I've got it out of context. Can you put it back in there for me? But I love this section.
Yeah. So it's along the same lines because the parent is the first teacher, right? And if they set the bar where it's supposed to be, and if they equip the kids with what they need to do, then it doesn't matter what the school itself brings in front of the children, they're going to succeed, right? Because if they set a foundation, and I'm talking about where like you don't have to be a certified teacher. I'm talking about just reading to your children. I'm talking about just having regular conversation when they speak to you. You encourage them to speak in complete sentences and not just one word, right? As basic as that is, it translates into when they have to write, right? Where they don't use cuss words or slang language, right? Because the parents don't realize that the way that they communicate with their children, when their children go to school, they communicate the same way, right? And so or like some of the things that we talked about earlier, as far as like respect. I don't care how great of a teacher you are, right? If you put a child in a classroom and the child cannot respect the teacher, there's nothing the teacher can do with that child, right? Because respect can either build bridges or create wars. I think that's another line that I put in a book, right? Is that, and those things, that's not the educator who's at the school. That's not their job. Their job is to help you enhance what you started at home. And I remember like a quick story where I was having a teacher conference like you, right? And it was just me and a parent and the student. And so I told the mom, I was like, she was blaming everyone under the sun, and her and her child take no responsibility. She like, wait, the school and the teachers and so on and so forth. And so after she was done, I said, you realize you're the teacher, you're the educator. I'm just here to help you. She's like, what are you talking about? She's like, you the teacher. I said, no, you are. So she was livid. And so I said, let me explain. I said, you have had this child for, I believe the child was in 5th grade. I said, 10 years so far. I said, I am going to get to know this child for 8 to 9 months. And I may never see this child again in her life. And I haven't, right? I haven't seen the child since then. And I said, you have this child. I'm only going to be in this child's life for a season. You have this child for a lifetime. So you are the educator, because you're going to have more interactions and have more influence on her than I will. So I'm just here in this season to help you. And she's like, nobody ever broke it to me like that. I said, well, I want you to remember that. I said, because nice. It's the truth. Like, it starts with you, right? And if you set the bar, and if you have the accountability, and if this child know that, if this child knows that whatever it is that you do at home, I'm continuing that, and that we're partnered together, then this child is going to be in line to make sure that they do right.
That's so poignant. It's funny. I've made, as a principal, I've made visits to children's homes to talk with a parent about, things that they could help with and stuff like this. And one of the things that's interesting, just on a simple note, is when you see that there is no reading material in the house. There's not a form of book. There's a giant TV usually, but it's missing reading material. And I think going with what you're talking about, that whole idea about, talking with them, reading stories to them, and providing them reading material, I think is one of those things as well. I mean, I just think that tells them something that's important, I think.
And it can even be creative. It doesn't even have to be something where they feel like, oh man, this is a chore, I got to read again. It can be something like, one of the things that I've done with my kids is that, like, they'll read a book and I'm like, okay, after you read it, we're going to go act it out. Oh, okay, we'll act it out. So now they're having fun with it, right? And so, or like if it's something that they enjoy, right? Like my girls are into gymnastics, right? So they get a book about gymnastics. So now they're eager to learn about it because that's what they're into. And so that's fine. Is just being able to know your child and know what works for your child and build on it, right? So that, and that's why I said, like, you don't have to be a certified teacher. You just need to be able to just like navigate those spaces and to build on what you see that's working.
So important. I mean, that's just, there's so much to that I just think that there are a lot of adults that abdicate that responsibility there. They just, they go and they don't think about it until the child turns around at it one day and says a few choice things that it's like,
right.
Nice. Okay. Where are we going? At the end of each, at the end of each chapter, you have two sections, one titled Chapter Takeaways and the other Probe and Transform. Why'd you include these sections?
So those sections, as I mentioned earlier, right? So the takeaways are, it's one thing to give information. It's also another thing to be able to summarize it and really have a time of reflection, because reflection is very powerful in any setting, right? And to really reflect on what was said and to probe and transform. It's like now to be able to look at maybe from your vantage point, wherever you may be, ask questions to see, okay, this is the information and this is where I am. Now what, then what? How is this helpful? How do I move from point A to point B? And this is where now it challenges you to be able to think through and and have some kind of transformative action plan, right? And even if it's just one thing, right? Just changing one thing to be able to just, change the trajectory of whatever it is that you're doing. So so they're just not reading through, because most people don't read a book in one sitting, right? So if you're at chapter 3 today and it's like, you don't get to chapter 4 a week later, you probably would have forgotten what chapter 3 is. You probably would have forgotten the content in chapter 3. So having that at the end, it forces you to kind of like, go back, summarize, put something into action before you even want to move on to the next chapter.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I love it because it makes you stop and think, and and you don't want you want to basically say to the reader, don't skip those. That's not why it's there. It's to help you think through it. I like that. Another formatting question is this: throughout your book, the education formula, you have this formula: respect plus accountability equals growth. Can you walk us through that? I mean, what does you mean, and why? Because you repeat it throughout the book, which I think is cool.
I do, and so the reason that I have that is I really started thinking about it. The more I was writing the book, the more I started thinking about all of the stakeholders. And again, there's a chapter for the parents, the policymakers, the principals, the teachers, the community leaders, the businesses, and then the last one to the student. And I was saying, what is the running theme or themes, right, that's applicable to all of the stakeholders? And definitely respect is one, right? I don't care who you're talking about, right? Whether we're talking about parent teaching the child respect, whether we're talking about that respect being reciprocal, right? When the child get in the classroom, or whether it is the policymaker having respect for educators and really understanding what they do, and not just like writing policies, just for the sake of it, and having accountability that these policies are going to benefit the child, because that's what it's supposed to be about, and in the community at large, because then that equals the growth and us as a nation, right? And so, in any aspect of the stakeholder, respect plus accountability is going to equal the growth piece. And so, after it came to me, I was like, yeah, that's it. that right there, in any situation, any circumstance, any individual, I can apply it. I can apply the formula, and it will work.
Oh, you're so much right. This is, and it's cool. I think a lot of times, what's awesome about your formula is that there's a mutual respect that has to happen, and if that's missing, the formula doesn't succeed, because then you're missing. Because then the next part of it, it's accountability, and if you lack that accountability for your actions or what you're doing or helping your child or whichever part of the formula you're sitting at, you're definitely not going to get growth out of it. Instead, you're going to probably get that mess you were referring to earlier.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
good. That's good stuff. And I love the way that you repeat it, though, because it's not something that's brought up at one point in the book and you don't see it again. So definitely sends the message, this is important. Don't ignore it.
Yep. Absolutely.
I like that. So, one of the things that I got to make sure I mention, because we're getting close to finishing up, and chapter 5 is called Fail or Flourish. And it starts this way: schools fail or flourish at the feet and leadership of administration. I love it. Let's talk about that. What do you mean?
So we start with the parents. So the parents have the kids, right, at home, right? And so the parents are the ones who are responsible for the foundation piece. Now the parent lends their children to the school. So now the principal is not the person who's in charge of what happens inside of that school, right? And I've been a part of schools that have failed, and I've been a part of schools that have flourished, and I've noticed that the difference is at the feet of leadership, right? And I think so many people have different leadership approaches, which is fine. But but it also has to be effective with the people that you're serving, right? Because I've seen principals leave a plush neighborhood, right, a suburban neighborhood, and they somehow send them to an inner city school, and their approach of their mentalities with is the same, and that's not going to work, right? Because you have a different community that you have to get to know, right? And you have to understand how to navigate, right? And so if you come and bring the same tactics or whatever it is that you use, and have the same expectations. Now, when I talk about expectations, I'm not talking about this as far as academic, because that's another pitfall. Or sometimes, they may think, well, the kids who are in urban areas, academically, they're not as strong, and so on and so forth, which is definitely not true. And so understanding who you're dealing with, the community, and just how to just function with the community, right? And some administrators, they don't give a crap, right? They're just there to collect a check, or they're like, what? Or these people don't care, or this is not working, or these kids, right? So they'll put on these kids, as opposed to just like really coming in and really like look at the situation, the scenarios, look at what's working, understand who your allies are, and build on that, right? And also articulate what the vision is, because you have to know where the school is, and you have to know, based on your vantage point, where it is that you're going to take the school, right? Because everybody's looking to you, right? And what culture you're going to build. So if you don't know what that culture is, and if you don't know how to get there, or if you try to do it on your own, or try to do it your way, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Right. Very much so. That's it is something interesting. I mean, because once you've been in enough schools where you have something to compare, and you automatically see the difference between that leadership role and someone who is just phoning it in or gathering that paycheck, and as opposed to the person who is treating kids like they all matter, treating kids like everything that the educators are there for is to help them figure out how to succeed or achieve their dreams, whatever those might be. And I think when the administrator doesn't know, what, hasn't even made up their mind about what the school's about, then you got a problem coming, because that people are gonna follow their lead to a certain extent, and if it's not a good lead, that's not a good. You gotta be careful who's following you then.
And it's also like, with the subtitle of the book, Maximizing the Village, is also taking the concept of understanding that we all are educators. Everybody in that building is an educator, right? It's not just the person in the classroom. And there's a section in the book where I talk about how, if leaders were to really maximize everyone in a building, including your counselors, your janitors, right? When I used to be an educator, I remember one time I brought a janitor into my classroom, like one of my lessons, because talking to him, right? And I speak to everyone, right? And if somebody's working in the workplace, I don't care what your title is. I don't go by titles. You're a human being, so we have a conversation. And so his story was just so powerful, right? And I'm like, there is no way that these kids should not take some of the nuggets that he shared with me, right? And so he was like, no, I'm not going to classroom. I was like, why not? He was like, well, I don't know if the principal is going to allow that, because I'm not a teacher. I was like, yo, so what are you talking about? Right? And so he came in and had a conversation with them. And I'm talking about, they were at all just listening to him, right? Nice. And the way that they saw him afterwards, and the level of respect they had for him afterwards changed, right? And so it just creates a different culture when you're able to do that. And this is another issue that we have, right? Because in any school that you go to, 99.9% of the schools, if the classroom teacher is not there, what happens? If they're absent, a substitute come in, what happens? Pandemonium. It's like, oh man, there's a substitute, right? It's a culture in the school that, like, I only respect this person or that person, as opposed to I'm going to respect any and every adult that comes into the space, right? There was something like for us when we were growing up in Haiti, where if any adult walked into the classroom, the entire class stands up, and we don't sit down until the adult tells us to sit down, right? And so I took a trip to Africa, and I went into a classroom, and they did that, and it was like, oh, flashback, and I froze, and I was like, oh snap, like, yeah, this is what used to happen when I was a kid. And the teacher looked at me and was like, well, you got to tell them to sit down. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I tell them to sit down. And I came back to the States that year. I was still in the classroom, and I implemented that. And so from that time on, it changed the whole culture of my classroom. I remember we had some people from the district who came in, to do their observation and the things that they do. And the kids stood up. And so they were confused. They were like, what was going on? And so the kids had to explain to them like what happened. And so they told the kids to sit down. And it just that year, or those couple of years in that school, it changed the entire culture of my students and how they viewed adults.
Nice. That's awesome. That's, it's amazing how doing something like that, where you're tweaking a little bit, you're doing a little bit something different, can make a huge difference. I love that. Getting back to chapters in your book, I'm going to be closing out here soon. And in the first section of chapter 10, it's called Own Your Education. You say, there are people around you who are working hard to make sure you succeed. None of their efforts matter if you don't work hard to make sure success happens. Oh, this is awesome. So let's share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I closed the book. That was the last chapter in the book. So I closed the book where I'm speaking to the students, and that's the thing. You have this whole village of individuals who are working to help you out, to make sure that you're successful, to make sure that you become somebody tomorrow, to make sure that you are able to be effective outside of the school walls, right? Not just academically, but just as a whole. And it really doesn't work because all of their efforts, all of the resources, from the bus driver to your parents, it won't work if you don't show up, because they can't do the work for you. At the end of the day, like, you have to do the work, and you have to be an active participant in order for education to work. So if they don't own it, then it's like all of the work would just be useless, right? And a lot of people will be disappointed, and that happens a lot, right? Where people are like, man, I put so much into this, and I put so much money, so much effort, so much sweat, so on and so forth. But if that person don't show up and they don't do the work, like, it's for naught.
You got that right. You got that right. That was just so powerful, because taking ownership is the key ingredient that some of them are missing sometimes. They think you're just gonna, snap your fingers or flick your wand or something like this, and suddenly they just get it. And it's like, yeah, no, you've got to take some ownership of this stuff. And I love the fact that this is how you closed out, because I think that's a lot of times the missing ingredient from a lot of what's going on with a kid and their family, and why it doesn't seem to be working out in the school.
Absolutely.
Well, Berwick, we're about to finish up. I got a last question I'd like to ask my guests, but before that, if someone wanted to follow up and connect with you and or learn more, where would you send them?
I'll send them to my website. BerwickAugustin.com is the hub, because there is, as you mentioned earlier, it has the academy. It also has a link to the publishing company, which is evoke180.com. And so it's everything that I do is at BerwickAugustin.com, because it also has the links to the social media handles. So that's the space that they will want to go to.
Excellent. I'll put that information in the show notes so to make it easy for them to find it and find you, which is good stuff. So last question, it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say, thank you?
Yes, I actually two of them because they work together. So I came to the United States at the age of 10 in the mid 80s from Haiti. And it was rough because at the time in South Florida and Miami, it was not cool to be Haitian. If someone knew that you were Haitian, you were getting jumped. Right? As a matter of fact, it was a kid in high school, which was down the street from where I was, and his girlfriend found out he was Haitian and he hung himself. Like, that's how bad it was.
Wow.
And so and so I was real confused because I came from Haiti where 99.9% of us are Black. And I moved to Little Haiti in Miami where 99.9% of the student population was Black, and they hated me, and I couldn't understand why, right? And so I didn't speak the language, so it was hard to communicate, but I found myself clicked up with other individuals who came from the same place where we had to walk home with sticks and rocks just to get home safely, right? And so imagine that in a 10-year-old body, right? And then now you're trying to learn in school where you also don't know the language. And so the ESOL department, Miss Rawlins, I still remember her name, and Mr. Ellis, they created a safe space for me and other students in that situation. And they also, I love the fact that they also were able to grab content out of me, right? Because what typically happens is that when you have a migrant student in the classroom, teachers who aren't trained will just put them on a laptop or just I'm thinking that they don't have any content when in reality that may be the exact opposite.
Right.
So they actually use effective ESOL strategies to help me and be able to see that some of the math that they were doing in fifth grade at the time, I had done a year or two prior in Haiti.
Wow.
So they was like, oh, like he knows this stuff. He just can't articulate it, right? And so much so that their efforts allowed for me to be placed in honors classes the very next year. So nice. I was barely speaking the language, but because I had so much content in me, they realized, oh no, we need to challenge this kid, right? And I think had that not happened, I probably would have been in the corner somewhere, in the corner of the classroom, just being totally lost, which is what happened to a lot of kids. And typically when kids are idle, they get in trouble, right? And so, I absolutely look back on that, and I think like they really, on so many different levels, set me up for success, and I want to say thank you to them. At Miami Edison Middle School.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And I'm glad you shared that story. It's amazing what the difference that adults who care can make, I guess is where I'm going.
Absolutely.
Berwick, thank you so much for sharing your book, The Education Formula, Maximizing the Village. This is a powerful statement, making sure education is on the right path. Your focus is awesome. I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
And thank you, Stephen, for having me. It was definitely fun being here with you.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.